Hey, it's Drea, and I'm here with another update from my third year of law school as a part-time/evening student at Georgetown University. Alright, so if you're new here, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, and for those who are returning, I'm sure you're tired of hearing this, but my name's Drea, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm currently a third-year part-time law student at Georgetown University, and I work full-time in the DC area. Before I get started, make sure you throw me some thumbs, comments, and subs down below. As y'all know, I don't get paid for this. It's a fun hobby, so your feedback is what makes it all worth it for me. Today I'm here to continue a talk on something that I get quite a few questions about, and that is the prospects of going to big law as a part-time law student. In the first video where I talked about this process, I talked about some of the resources that I found helpful while I was doing on-campus interviews. In today's video, I'm gonna give a really condensed crash course on the formal application process. The name of the process that I'm talking about today is something called OCI, which stands for On-Campus Interviews. Before I begin, I want to start by saying that not every law school has OCI, and whether or not a school has OCI is by all means something that a student should look into before they even apply to a law school. If your aim is to work at a large, high-paying law firm once you graduate from law school, whether or not your school has OCI will vastly impact big law career options. But if your school doesn't have OCI, that's totally fine. Just know that's not going to be the focus of today's video for me. Applicants can usually still submit all of their application materials on a law firm's website on the career page. All right, so let's get into it. What exactly is OCI? In short, it's like speed dating for law students and law firms. Every school does it a little bit differently, so I can only speak to Georgetown's process. But in general, law students submit their resume and transcripts to an entire host of law firms. And then those same students complete a series of very long, oftentimes pretty intense interviews with the law firms in follow-up. All right, so how does it work? OCI can begin at some schools as early as, I think I've heard as early July, and wrap up as late August or sometimes early September. Also, some law firms permit you to begin the recruitment process before OCI even begins at your school. And while I'll acknowledge this is something that I personally did, it was something that I had to use the channels of my own personal networks to complete. Some schools also have BIPOC recruitment processes, which typically take place the week before OCI begins at whatever school you attend. Now, once the OCI process begins through your school, for example, I believe Georgetown's began in the last week of July, you're able to rank up to 50 law firms where you're interested in working. These law firms will review your transcript and resume and choose you for something called a screener interview. If I recall correctly, screener interviews at Georgetown took place during that first week, which was the last week of July. Screener interviews are typically short. A lot of mine were only 20 to 30 minutes, and they were all conducted virtually. Essentially, they're the beginning of the interview process where law firms get a general feel of who you are as a person, to the extent that that's possible in 20 minutes, and the type of applicant that you are. Now, screeners are just the beginning of the process. Once you complete a screener, you may be selected for something called a callback interview. All of the callbacks that I attended were conducted virtually with the exception of one law firm. I will say that callback interviews are much more extensive than screeners. In my experience, they were typically anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes long and held with the host of anywhere from 3 to 6 different partners of counsels, associates, or any other people involved in the hiring process. So if you're doing the math, callback interviews typically consisted of about 2 to 3 hours of back-to-back interviews. Once you complete callback interviews, the people on the hiring committee or the people who interviewed you will typically do some deliberations. I'm assuming some of this involves comparing you to other applicants that they're considering. And hopefully in the days that follow, applicants will receive some type of offer or rejection. All someone who wants to go to big law needs is just one offer. Once I got one offer, I felt completely set for the the rest of the process. Now, to give you a gauge of how much of a numbers game this is, I applied to about 60 different law firms. Now, this doesn't mean that I created cover letters and did extensive applications for each of these law firms. It just means that I submitted my information, which included at least a transcript and a resume, to at least 60 different law firms. Now, of those 60 different law firms, I received 13 screener interviews at 13 different law firms within the Washington, D.C. area. And of those 13 screener interviews, I received 7 callbacks. Of those 7 callbacks, I received 4 offers in DC, and I withdrew my application from the remaining 3. I ended up choosing just one firm from all of those options. I'm not going to mention the name of the law firm that I'm planning to work at here on YouTube for a myriad of reasons, but ultimately I'm very excited about my decision, and we will see how things go in the summer of 2023. That's pretty much it and all that I have for today. A OCI crash course on what the typical process looks like, or at least what it looked like for me. If you're an evening law student, make sure to catch my next video where I talk about tips and tricks during OCI that are particularly helpful to part-time and evening law students. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see y'all in a couple of weeks.